Christmas is supposed to bring families closer, but that night, in front of everyone I loved, my daughter-in-law poured her wine down my chest like I was nothing. No one defended me, not even my son. I left the table in silence, humiliated, but the next morning, when the phone rang, she discovered that her cruelty had consequences she never imagined. For as long as I can remember, Christmas was sacred in our home. My late wife used to hum carols while she baked pies. The grandkids ran around chasing each other, and laughter spilled from every room. Even after she passed, I tried to keep the tradition alive. This year, though, my son's wife Clara insisted they host dinner. I agreed, telling myself it would be good for the younger ones to carry the torch. I walked into their home that night holding gifts for my grandchildren and hope in my heart that we might all feel a little closer. At first, everything seemed normal. The tree sparkled, the children sang, and the smell of roasted turkey filled the house. I thought maybe, just maybe, my wife would have been proud to see us gathered. But as the night wore on, I noticed Clara's sharp glances, the way her lips curled whenever I spoke, the way my son avoided my eyes. Something simmered under the surface, and I didn't understand why. Then, during the toast, Clara stood with her glass of red wine. She smiled that false smile of hers and said to family. Everyone raised their glasses, and then she leaned forward, tipped her glass, and poured the deep red wine across my shirt. The warmth of the liquid spread over me, but the sting of humiliation cut far deeper. The table gasped. My granddaughter's fork clattered to her plate. Clara smirked. Oops, clumsy me. I stood, dabbing at my chest with a napkin, the room spinning with shame. No one spoke, not even my son. I didn't fight back. I didn't shout. I simply placed my napkin down, whispered Merry Christmas, and walked out into the cold night. My silence wasn't weakness. It was the seed of something. Clara could never expect the justice that was already on its way. That night, I couldn't bring myself to turn on the lights when I returned home. The house was dark, the tree standing alone in the corner, twinkling faintly in silence. My late wife's ornaments still hung on the branches, little glass angels she collected every year. I sat there in the living room, staring at them, my shirt still stained with Clara's wine. Christmas was supposed to bring families together. Instead, it left me humiliated in front of my children and grandchildren, as though I were some burden to be laughed at. The words I wanted to say at the table clawed at my throat now. How dare you? How dare you make me less than nothing in front of my own blood? But the words never came, only silence. I replayed the scene over and over. The smirk on Clara's face, the way my son kept his head down, unwilling to look me in the eye, the way not one of them, not even family, stood up for me. The shame burned deeper with every thought. By midnight, I was still awake, sitting alone by the window. Snow drifted outside. It should have been peaceful, but it only felt like the cold reflection of my life, quiet, ignored, unwanted. And then, just as dawn broke, the phone rang. The sound startled me. I almost didn't answer, but when I picked it up, a familiar voice cut through the silence. "John," said Mr. Harris, my lawyer. His tone was calm, steady but serious. I frowned. "Harris, it's Christmas morning. Why are you calling?" There was a pause, and then he said the words that made my heart stop. "I heard what happened last night, and I think it's time we talk about the estate. Your daughter-in-law may believe she embarrassed you, but she doesn't realize she's just lost something much greater." I froze, gripping the receiver tight, because Harris wasn't the type of man to call lightly. If he was reaching out, it meant something had already been set in motion, something Clara, and even my son, had no idea about. The humiliation of last night still burned, but in that moment, a flicker of something else lit inside me, not anger, not sadness, resolve. The next morning, the roads were still slick with snow when I drove to Harris's office. The world outside looked calm, blanketed in white, but inside me a storm raged. Clara thought she had won by humiliating me in front of everyone. What she didn't know was that her victory had just unlocked something I had long kept hidden. Harris welcomed me in with his usual composed manner. He closed the blinds, poured 2 cups of coffee, and then slid a thick folder across the desk. John, your late wife was smarter than anyone realized. She prepared for this. I frowned, my hands trembling slightly as I opened the folder. Inside were documents I hadn't seen in years, amendments to my estate, property deeds, trust agreements. Harris tapped the papers with a steady finger. After your wife got sick, she told me something. She said, Clara is clever but cruel. One day she'll show her true colors, protect John from her, and so we built safeguards into your estate plan. I swallowed hard, scanning the pages. The will had been updated years ago. The house, the savings, even the stocks I had tucked away all bypassed my son and Clara entirely. The primary beneficiaries were my daughter and my grandchildren. Clara would never touch a penny. She assumed she'd inherit through your son. Harris said softly. She assumed she could belittle you now and still profit later. But she doesn't know the truth. She's already been written out. I sat back, my chest heavy with both sorrow and relief. So she embarrassed me in front of everyone. And for what? For an inheritance that isn't even hers. Harris gave me a small, knowing smile. Exactly. By showing her cruelty, she sealed her own fate. And now, John, the question is whether you want to keep this quiet or make it clear. I stared at the papers, memories flooding my mind, my wife whispering her worries late at night, her hand in mine as she made me promise to protect the family home. I thought of Clara's smirk as she poured wine down my shirt, and I thought of my son's silence, his refusal to defend me. No, I said finally, my voice steady, this doesn't stay quiet. They need to know the truth. Harris leaned back. Then, John, it's time to show them what real power looks like. That evening, as I sat alone with the estate folder on my lap, I realized something. Clara thought her cruelty had broken me, but instead it had triggered a chain of events she could never control. She hadn't humiliated me. She had awakened the truth my wife had prepared years ago, and soon everyone would see it. 3 nights later, I invited the whole family to my house. The snow was still heavy on the ground, but the roads were clear enough for travel. When they arrived, my children and grandchildren filled the old rooms with chatter, but there was an edge in the air, a stiffness no one wanted to name. Clara arrived last. She swept into the room in a new coat, her heels clicking across the hardwood floor. She greeted everyone with that practiced smile, then fixed her eyes on me. There it was again, the smirk, that smug little curl at the corner of her lips that said she still believed she had the upper hand. I waited until dinner was finished, until plates were pushed back and coffee was poured. Then I stood slowly, resting my hand on the back of my chair. The room went quiet. I've called you all here tonight. I began because something happened at Christmas that cannot be ignored. Clara shifted in her seat, pretending to look bored, but her eyes flickered. My son looked nervous, as though he already knew what was coming. I placed a thick envelope on the table. This is my updated estate plan. Your mother and I prepared it years ago. And now, in light of recent events, I think it's time everyone knows the truth. Clara leaned forward, her smirk widening. Estate plan. Really, John, is this about money again? I didn't answer her. Instead, I pulled out the first page, reading clearly, the family home, financial accounts, and investments shall pass directly to the grandchildren and daughter of John Carter. Not to his son, not to his daughter-in-law. Effective immediately, gasps rippled through the room. My daughter covered her mouth in shock. My grandchildren's eyes went wide. My son's face drained of color, and Clara, the smirk collapsed. Her jaw tightened, her knuckles white as she gripped her wine glass. You can't be serious, she stammered. I looked her dead in the eye. Serious enough to put it in writing. Serious enough to have my lawyer witness every signature. Serious enough that you will never touch what your cruelty tried to claim. The room was heavy with silence. My son lowered his head, shame flooding his features. My grandchildren looked at me with something I hadn't seen in years, respect. Finally, I said, respect is the foundation of this family, and respect was broken that night. But this house, this legacy, will remain in the hands of those who honor it, not those who disgrace it. Clara's face burned red. She opened her mouth as if to argue, but no words came. For the first time, she had nothing to say. I sat down slowly, the echo of my wife's wisdom steady in my chest. The truth had been spoken. The smirk was gone. And the power Clara thought she had over me, it crumbled in an instant. The confrontation shattered the illusion Clara had wrapped herself in. For days after, she tried to patch the cracks. First came the apologies, sugary, practiced, dripping with false sweetness. She called me the next morning. John, I was out of line on Christmas. It was just wine, just a joke. I didn't mean any harm. Her words were smooth, but her voice trembled, not with guilt, with fear. I listened in silence, then said, Clara, respect isn't a joke, and you showed the world exactly who you are. Then I hung up. When apologies failed, she turned to manipulation. She cornered my daughter, pleading with her to talk some sense into your father. She tried to play the victim, claiming I had misunderstood her, that I was too sensitive, that she never meant to humiliate me, but the papers were signed, the ink was dry. The estate no longer belonged to her. Every desperate attempt only deepened her downfall. My son tried too, his voice strained with shame. Dad, maybe we can fix this. Clara just. She got carried away. I looked him in the eye and said, a man protects his family, Daniel. You stayed silent, and silence has consequences. He had no reply. The family began to see Clara differently. At gatherings, conversations grew shorter when she entered the room. Friends whispered about the Christmas incident, about the will, about how greed had stripped her of everything. She had once carried herself like the queen of the family, but now she stood alone, a figure everyone avoided. The legacy she expected to inherit was gone. The respect she once demanded had evaporated. And all it took was one signature, one line of ink that carried the weight of justice. One evening, I sat in my study, the estate papers locked safely away, and let the silence settle around me. I thought of my wife, her gentle voice, her unwavering foresight. She had seen this coming long before I did. She had built the safeguards that now stood like walls around me. Clara thought she had destroyed me at that dinner table, but all she really did was reveal herself to everyone else. Justice hadn't arrived with shouting or vengeance. It came quietly in her own undoing. I leaned back, exhaled, and let the truth rest in my chest like a steady flame. Sometimes the sweetest justice is simply watching cruelty collapse under its own weight. The months after that Christmas dinner reshaped the family in ways I never expected. At first, the air was thick with tension. Clara no longer called, no longer smirked, no longer dared to look me in the eye. My son, embarrassed and conflicted, kept his distance too. For a time, I wondered if I had lost them both for good, but slowly, something unexpected happened. My grandchildren began visiting me more often. They'd come to the old house after school, drop their backpacks by the door, and ask me to tell them stories about their grandmother. Their laughter returned life to the walls, filling the silence Clara had tried to carve into my heart. I realized then that I hadn't lost my family. I had simply cut away the rot so the roots could grow strong again. Word of what happened spread quietly through town. People remembered the night she poured wine over her father-in-law's shirt, remembered the humiliation, remembered the estate announcement that followed. She became the subject of whispers in grocery aisles, the example people used when they warned their children about arrogance and greed. Clara hadn't just lost an inheritance, she had lost her reputation, and in many ways that was the harsher punishment. One evening, I stood in the living room, staring at the tree still bare from the holidays. I touched one of my wife's ornaments, a fragile glass angel she had always hung herself, and I smiled. She had been right all along. Justice doesn't always come with thunder and flames. Sometimes it comes with ink on paper, with a truth revealed at the right moment, with silence that cuts deeper than any argument ever could. Clara thought she had poured wine on me, but really, she poured away her future. Spring arrived, and with it came a new calm. The snow had melted, the wine, stained shirt long since thrown away, but the memory of that night still lingered like a scar across the family. Clara had grown quieter. Her once sharp tongue was now hushed at gatherings, her smirk replaced with a strained politeness. People no longer looked at her with admiration or respect, only with caution. She had become a ghost in her own story, living under the shadow of her choices. My son, well, Daniel still struggled. He oscillated between loyalty to his wife and shame over what he allowed that night. But little by little, I saw a change in him. He would stop by more often, sometimes without Clara, sometimes just to sit in silence with me. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was heavy, thoughtful, a silence of a man trying to find his way back. The true joy came from the grandchildren. They were the ones who seemed to understand without words. They brought laughter back to my home. They wanted to hear stories about the days before Clara, about how their grandmother loved to bake apple pies on snowy afternoons, about how family used to mean something bigger than pride and wealth. I realized then that the estate I had safeguarded wasn't just money or property. It was legacy, it was memory, it was respect, and now it was in the right hands. By summer, Clara's social world had unraveled. She wasn't invited to as many dinners, wasn't included in as many conversations. Neighbors who once admired her ambition now shook their heads at her arrogance. She hadn't lost just my inheritance, she had lost her standing. The humiliation she had tried to throw on me had returned to her, multiplied, and I didn't need to say a word. One afternoon, as I watched my grandchildren play in the yard, I thought back to that Christmas dinner, the smirk, the stain, the silence. It could have broken me, but instead it revealed the truth. When people show you who they are, believe them, and when justice finally comes, it doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it signs its name quietly on a piece of paper. Sometimes it simply lets the guilty sit in the mess they made. My wife's foresight, my lawyer's loyalty, my grandchildren's innocence, these were the things that saved me. Clara had tried to make me feel small, but in the end, she only diminished herself. Now, as the seasons change and life carries forward, I carry one truth above all. Betrayal may sting for a night, but justice lasts a lifetime. Autumn crept in, the leaves turning gold and red, and with it came a sense of closure. Months had passed since that fateful Christmas, yet its shadow still lingered not over me, but over Clara. By now, her arrogance had crumbled into silence. She avoided my eyes at gatherings, her once boastful tone replaced by quiet mutters. The woman who once poured wine on me for all to see now carried her own invisible stain. My son, Daniel, stood somewhere in the middle. He had begun to understand the cost of his silence that night, the weight of not standing up for his own father. One evening he came by alone. He sat in the chair across from me, his voice low. "Dad, I should have defended you. I see that now. I let her control the room, and I let you down. For the first time in years, I saw the boy he used to be ashamed, but honest." I placed my hand on his shoulder. "You lost your way, son, but the path back is still here. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start." Meanwhile, Clara's isolation grew heavier. Friends distanced themselves. Neighbors whispered. Even family members kept her at arm's length. The estate, the money, the home, everything she thought she could claim was gone. She had poured wine on me to humiliate me, to make me small. But humiliation had found her instead. I walked through the halls of my home one evening, pausing at the family portraits on the wall. My grandchildren's laughter echoed in the distance, their drawings taped to the refrigerator, their shoes scattered in the hallway. This was the legacy my wife had wanted me to protect, not the money, not the property, but the sense of belonging, of respect, of love, and now it was safe. That Christmas dinner had felt like the end of everything. But in truth, it was the beginning of something stronger. It stripped away the lies, the arrogance, the cruelty, leaving only what mattered. Clara became the warning whispered about in hushed tones, the daughter-in-law who poured away her future with one cruel act. And me, I became the reminder that dignity, patience, and justice always outlast betrayal. Because no matter how dark the night, the morning always brings the truth. Winter returned, and with it came another Christmas. The house was alive with warmth again, the grandchildren helping me string lights, my daughter bringing her famous apple pie, the tree sparkling just as it had in the years my wife was alive. But this Christmas was different. There was no smirk from Clara, no staged performance of control. She sat quietly in the corner, a shadow of the woman who once poured wine on me for the world to see. Her eyes darted across the room, but no one met her gaze. The laughter didn't include her anymore. My son sat beside me, quieter too, but different. He helped me carve the turkey, poured my glass of water, and looked me in the eye with something I hadn't seen in a long time: respect. His silence that night at the first Christmas dinner had cost him dearly, but perhaps, just perhaps, he was learning what it meant to stand tall again. In the months that followed, Clara's mask slipped further. Her friends were gone, her influence in the family vanished. She had burned her own bridge, and now she had nowhere to go. She hadn't just lost the inheritance. She had lost her reputation, her dignity, her place in the family, and though I said little to her, the truth hung heavy in the air. She had done it to herself. One evening, I sat with my grandchildren by the fireplace. They asked me to tell them stories about their grandmother again, about her kindness, her laughter, how she taught us that respect was worth more than gold. I looked at their bright faces, their eager eyes, and I realized this was my real inheritance. Not money, not houses, not assets locked in folders, but the lessons I could leave behind that cruelty always collapses, and respect always outlives greed. Clara's wine may have stained my shirt, but it didn't stain my soul. She thought humiliation would break me. Instead, it revealed her own downfall, because betrayal has a way of turning on itself, and justice doesn't always come in the roar of a courtroom or the strike of a gavel. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the way a family shifts, in the way respect is restored, in the way truth finally stands taller than lies. So when people whisper now, they don't whisper about me. They whisper about her. And that is the sweetest justice of all. A year had passed since that infamous Christmas dinner, yet the memory of the wine pouring down my shirt still flickered in my mind, not as a wound anymore, but as a reminder the moment the family's true colors were revealed. This Christmas my house was once again alive with warmth. The table was set with care, laughter rolled through the halls, and the smell of roasted turkey drifted from the kitchen. The grandchildren decorated cookies. My daughter led them in singing carols, and I sat in my chair, watching it all unfold with a full heart. But this year, something was different. Clara was absent. She had chosen not to come, perhaps out of shame, perhaps out of pride. Daniel came alone, his face softer, his eyes humbler. He pulled me aside before dinner, his voice low. "Dad," he said, "I know I failed you last year. I let her humiliate you. I let you stand alone. But I'm here now, not for her, not for appearances, for you. For the first time in a long while, I embraced my son." We said little more, but sometimes forgiveness isn't found in words. Sometimes it's found in silence, in the way two men finally meet each other's eyes. News of Clara trickled in now and then. A friendship lost here, a reputation ruined there. She had built her identity on pride and entitlement, and when those crumbled, she had nothing left. Her downfall was quiet, almost invisible, yet absolute. She had poured wine on me to strip away my dignity, but she had stripped herself instead. That was her legacy, a cautionary tale whispered in families, a warning of how greed always poisons its own well. As I looked around the room that Christmas, surrounded by the people who still mattered, I realized something. Clara's cruelty had failed. It hadn't destroyed me. It hadn't broken the family. If anything, it had reforged us, sharper, clearer, stronger. My grandchildren laughed. My daughter smiled. My son carved the turkey with steady hands. This was victory, not revenge, not paperwork, not even justice in the legal sense. Victory was knowing that respect had returned to my home, that legacy had been restored, that love, even wounded love, had survived. Clara will always be remembered for the stain she left, but I will be remembered for what I carried beyond it: dignity, patience, justice, because in the end, betrayal is only powerful for a moment. Justice, though. Justice lives forever in the way truth reshapes a family, in the way respect reclaims its place at the table, in the way scars become stories we pass down. And so, as I raised my glass that night, I whispered only 2 words in my heart, words my wife would have smiled to hear. We endured. Cruelty may win the moment, but justice always wins the story. Thank you for watching Betrayal to Justice. If this story left a mark on you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more haunting tales where lies fall and truth stands tall.